I'm your dream companion, the one who helps you unwind after a long, busy day. Before you drift off to sleep, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from right now? What time is it there? Now take a deep breath, get comfortable in bed, and come with me because the night is just beginning, and this story is all yours. It began with whispers, then with screams, in the quiet farmlands of Puerto Rico. During the mid-1990s, farmers woke to find their livestock dead, drained of blood, their bodies marked by small, circular punctures that defied explanation. The villagers had never seen anything like it. Goats, chickens, cows all left cold and hollow beneath the moonlight, their wounds to clean, too deliberate to be the work of a wild animal. The newspapers called it an unknown predator. The locals called it El Chupacabras, the goat sucker. Eyewitnesses described a creature unlike any known beast. It stood no taller than a child, yet its presence carried the weight of a nightmare. Its skin was scaled, greenish and rough, glistening under the moon as though it had crawled from some forgotten swamp. A line of jagged spines ran down its back, and its eyes glowed a deep, burning red. Some said it moved on two legs like a human. Others swore it crawled on all fours, darting between shadows with inhuman speed. Wherever it appeared, silence followed. No dogs barked, no insects sang. It was as if the night itself held its breath. The first documented case came from the small town of Canavan. A farmer named Madeline Tolentino reported seeing the creature outside her window, staring directly at her. Its face, she claimed, was something between an animal and a demon. The next morning, she found 8 of her sheep dead, each with identical puncture wounds on their necks. The police dismissed it as hysteria. But when the same thing happened to the neighboring farmhand, then the next fear spread like wildfire. By the end of that month, over 100 animals were found mutilated across the region. Rumors took root faster than the authorities could silence them. Some said the chupacabra came from a government experiment gone wrong, a hybrid created in a secret lab beneath the rainforest. Others whispered it was extraterrestrial, a creature left behind after a UFO sighting reported in the same week. There were even those who claimed it was a curse, an ancient punishment reborn for humanity's arrogance. But all who spoke of it agreed on one thing: it was real, and it was hungry. The attacks spread beyond Puerto Rico to Mexico, to Chile, to the southern United States. Farmers in Texas began finding their goats and cattle in the same grisly condition. Investigators arrived, scientists examined the remains, and skeptics laughed. Yet none could deny the strange precision of the wounds. The bodies were bloodless, organs missing, as if surgically removed. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints, no predators in sight. It was as if the chupacabra appeared, fed, and vanished back into the darkness. People began locking their animals inside at night, but even that did not always work. In some cases, the creature was said to claw through wood and wire, its claws sharp enough to tear metal. Dogs who faced it were found dead the next morning, their own blood drained as well. The more the villagers tried to protect their homes, the bolder the monster seemed to become. Fear turned to obsession, and obsession to panic. Some men stayed up through the night with shotguns, waiting by the stables. None of them ever saw it clearly, but all reported hearing the same sound, a slow hiss, followed by silence, and then the sound of something dragging across the ground. The legend of the chupacabra grew, feeding on fear, twisting itself into every retelling. And yet, for all the stories, no one could say for certain what it was or where it came from, only that it left behind emptiness, and that when the night fell silent and the moon hung low, the beast was near. By the summer of 1996, fear had already crossed the ocean. Reports of the chupacabra began appearing not only in Puerto Rico, but throughout Latin America. In the dry plains of Mexico, farmers told of finding their chickens dead, their cattle gutted in the same strange way. The newspapers printed blurry photographs of claw marks in the dirt, strange tracks that seemed neither human nor animal. Witnesses spoke of piercing red eyes, glowing from behind the trees, and of hearing a low growl that froze them in place. In a small town near Monterey, a group of men decided to hunt it. They carried torches and rifles, and they waited in the fields under a cloudless sky. For hours, There was nothing but the sound of crickets and the rustle of dry grass. Then, one of them heard a faint scratching, followed by a sharp hiss. Before anyone could react, something leaped out from the darkness. It was fast, faster than their eyes could follow. A blur of scales and spines. One man fired his gun, the others screamed. When the torches hit the ground, they saw it standing there for just a moment, a creature the size of a small child, its face twisted, its teeth glistening in the torchlight. And then it was gone. The men swore that it vanished before their eyes, as though the shadows themselves had swallowed it whole. When the authorities arrived the next morning, all they found were the men's footprints, and one of their dogs dead, bloodless, and pale. The official report dismissed the story as drunken imagination, yet, soon after, similar cases began to surface in other towns. It was spreading north, south, east, west, like a disease of fear that no wall or fence could contain. Television crews arrived. Reporters stood outside barns and farms, their microphones trembling in their hands. Scientists and skeptics tried to explain the phenomena. Some blamed wild dogs, others said vampire bats. But even they admitted that the wounds were too precise, too clean. The victims' sheep, goats, sometimes even horses were untouched by teeth or claws. There were no torn limbs, no blood on the ground, just 2 neat punctures and a hollow body. And then came the sightings in the United States. In Texas, a rancher named Douglas witnessed the creature one evening just before dawn. He described it as a hairless, grayish animal walking on its hind legs. With a face like a skull, he shot at it but missed. When he examined the tracks, he found no blood, no firmly 3 deep impressions in the dirt, like claw marks from something far heavier than it looked. He told the police, who told the media, who told the world. The legend had crossed borders, carried by fear and fascination alike. Soon, the Chupacabra became a household name. Talk shows invited supposed witnesses. Sketch artists drew dozens of versions, some reptilian, others canine. The mystery deepened when different regions described different forms. In Puerto Rico and Central America, it was a scaly, alien-like being with glowing eyes and spikes. In Texas, it resembled a mutated coyote. Bald and gaunt, its skin gray and stretched tight over bones. It was as if the creature itself could change, adapting to its surroundings, or perhaps it was more than one species altogether. But what frightened people most wasn't just the killings. It was the silence that came before them, the sudden stillness in the air, the way the night seemed to hold its breath, just moments before the animals were found. Survivors claimed that even the wind stopped moving when it came. Birds fell quiet. The stars seemed to fade. By the late 1990s, hunters, scientists, and cryptozoologists were traveling to Latin America, hoping to capture the beast or at least prove it existed. Some claimed to have found hair samples. Others discovered strange clawed footprints. Yet every piece of evidence seemed to vanish under scrutiny. Samples went missing. Photos turned out blurred. Videos were too dark to tell anything at all. It was as though the Chupacabra itself refused to be known. Still, the killings continued. Each time they faded from the news, another wave would rise, and each time, the legend grew stronger, fed by fear, by mystery, and by that primal feeling that something was out there, watching from just beyond the edge of the light. Some said the Chupacabra was not a creature of flesh at all, but of belief that the more people feared it, the stronger it became. Others believed it was a warning, a message that the earth itself was tired of mankind's cruelty. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: once the Chupacabra's eyes met yours, you never forgot them. 2 burning red stars, floating in the dark. By the turn of the millennium, the Chupacabra had become more than a myth. It was a headline, a superstition, a whispered name that mothers used to warn their children at night. But for those who claimed to have seen it, the terror was re-etched into memory like scars. In the damp hills of Honduras, a shepherd named Mateo swore he woke to the sound of his flock screaming. When he ran out into the moonlight, he saw a shape crouched over one of his goats. It was small, but muscular, its spine lined with bony ridges that shimmered in the pale light. The air smelled of iron and wet stone. Mateo froze. The creature turned its head, and for an instant he saw its face. expressionless, almost human. Then it leapt the fence with impossible speed and vanished into the trees. In the morning, 7 goats lay dead. Their bodies were cold, dry, and empty. Stories like Mateo's poured in from every corner of Latin America. Farmers began guarding their livestock at night, carrying torches and silver blades, believing the creature feared the light. But light was no protection. In one village near San Juan, a boy disappeared while chasing his dog into the woods. When they found him hours later, he was alive, trembling, unable to speak. The only words he managed before collapsing were the eyes they shine like fire. Authorities tried to contain the panic. Biologists held press conferences, explaining that many attacks were the work of coyotes suffering from Menja disease that left them hairless and skeletal. The media broadcasted side-by-side images. The gaunt, gray dogs next to artists' renderings of the reptilian beast. Yet for those who had seen it, the explanation felt hollow. No wild dog could pierce flesh so cleanly, could drain a body with such precision. No known predator left its victims untouched by struggle. In the Caribbean, fishermen spoke of seeing strange lights beneath the water at night, followed by the echo of hissing from the mangroves. In Nicaragua, 2 men found claw marks on a church door, burned into the wood as if by acid. A farmer in Guatemala claimed the creature followed him for days, always appearing at dusk, watching from the edge of his fields, never attacking, never leaving. As reports spread northward, scientists from the United States arrived with cameras and traps. One expedition in 2004, deep in the desert near Nuevo Leon, caught something on infrared, a small, upright figure moving swiftly between the cacti. When they reached the spot, there were no footprints, no fur, no heat trace, just the smell of sulfur in the air. The footage was analyzed for months, but revealed nothing more than a flicker of motion. Meanwhile, skeptics insisted the legend had evolved into mass hysteria and urban myth, sustained by rumor and fear. Yet every time belief seemed to fade, another incident occurred. A rancher's horse drained overnight. A stray dog found mutilated behind a gas station. A flock of birds falling dead from the sky. Each event added another layer to the mystery, another thread to the growing tapestry of dread. There were those who thought the creature might not come from Earth at all. Theories linked it to extraterrestrial experiments, escaped genetic hybrids, or secret military research. UFO enthusiasts pointed out that sightings often coincided with reports of lights in the sky. Others turned to folklore, claiming that Chupacabra was an ancient guardian, awakened by human destructionist spirit, sent to reclaim the blood we had stolen from the world. Even within the communities most haunted by it, the legend shifted with each retelling. Some described a beast covered in green scales, others a thin gray dog with no hair. Some said it walked on 2 legs, others on 4. But all agreed on one thing: the eyes. Always those eyes, 2 burning embers that cut through the dark and into the soul. Over time, the lines between myth and truth blurred. Governments dismissed it, churches ignored it, but people still locked their barns and whispered prayers at night. They hung crucifixes above stable doors, sprinkled salt around the fences, left bowls of milk at the edges of fields and chant rituals for a modern fear. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the killing stopped. Months passed without reports, years without evidence. The world moved on. Scientists called it proof that hysteria had run its course. But in the rural towns where the legend was born, few believed it had truly ended. Because sometimes, when the night grows too quiet and the moon turns red, the animals still stir, restless and uneasy. Farmers wake to find their dogs staring at the horizon, ears pricked, bodies trembling. Then far away, carried on the wind, comes a sound like breathing, slow, deliberate, hungry. The Chupacabra, they say, never dies, it only sleeps. Years passed, and with them, the memory of the Chupacabra began to fade like an old scar. News anchors stopped mentioning it. Scientists moved on to newer mysteries, to the rest of the world. It became just another campfire tale in urban legend buried under laughter and skepticism. But legends never die easily. They sink into the soil, seep into the roots of a place, waiting for the right silence to rise again. In 2019, in a quiet farming town on the outskirts of Jalisco, Mexico, something stirred. It began the way these things always do with a single night. A strange noise, a few missing chickens. The farmer, a man named Ernesto Salinas, thought little of it. He blamed wild dogs, set traps, and went to bed. The next morning, his goats were gone. Not torn apart, not scattered, simply gone. Only one remained, lying in the middle of the corral, pale and bloodless. Ernesto examined the body, whispering a prayer. There were no paw marks, no struggle, just 2 small punctures below the jaw. He locked the doors that night. He would not sleep. By dawn, every animal on the property was dead. When authorities came, they dismissed his story. Coyotes, they said, though they found no tracks, no teeth marks, no mess. But the locals knew better. They had seen this before. Their grandparents had whispered of it when the power went out, when the fields turned still. Word spread, quiet but quick. Soon, other farmers began finding their animals in the same condition, drained, untouched, almost peaceful. One claimed to have seen a figure moving through the fog, small and hunched, its eyes glimmering red like coals. Another swore he heard a low hiss beneath his floorboards, like something breathing just below the earth. Within weeks, the pattern stretched across the border. Ranchers in Texas reported identical killings. Drone footage captured what looked like long, narrow tracks through desert dust, deep as if pressed by claws. A security camera from a rural barn caught a shadow that moved against the wind. Experts scrambled again to explain. Diseased coyotes, said one. Mass panic, said another. But none could explain why the victims were always bloodless. None could explain the metallic smell that lingered after each attack. None could explain the silence that followed the eerie, absolute quiet of fields holding their breath. Then came the night of the storm. In a village near Monterey, rain lashed the windows of a small inn. The power failed. A group of travelers gathered by candlelight, swapping stories to pass the time. One woman spoke softly of her uncle, who'd seen the creature decades ago. Another, a soldier, claimed to have chased something through the woods, as a boy, something that left no footprints and screamed, like metal twisting. The candles flickered. The wind carried a strange hum, deep and rhythmic. Someone said it sounded like breathing. Then, from outside, came the unmistakable thud of hoofs or claws against the wet ground. Slow, heavy, near. When the lights returned an hour later, the windows were smeared with something dark. No one slept that night. By morning, the roads were washed clean by rain. Only one thing remained, a small circle burned into the mud, as if something had rested there, watching, waiting. The government never confirmed what happened. The reports vanished, but the locals remember. They still tell the story when the nights grow long and the wind turns cold. They say the creature sleeps beneath the desert hills, buried in the dust, feeding on the stillness of the land. And when the moon is full and the air tastes of iron, they say you can hear it again, the faint, steady rhythm of something alive beneath the ground. Some claim it's a curse born from the blood we've spilled, a reminder of nature's vengeance. Others believe it's a visitor, not from this world but another, an echo of experiments gone wrong, or a hunter from beyond the stars. But those who have seen its eyes don't waste time wondering. They just close their doors, whisper a prayer, and leave an offering at the edge of their land. A bowl of milk, a cross drawn in salts, anything to keep the silence at bay. Because the chupacabra is not gone. It waits, it listens, and one night, when the world grows too quiet again, it will rise once more, hungry for the blood that first gave it life. Marcus Hill had never been nervous about meeting a girlfriend's parents before. He'd always been the kind of man who could charm his way through awkward dinners and forced smiles. But this time was different. Maybe it was because of how perfect Clara seemed, too perfect, like someone sculpted out of porcelain and privilege. Or maybe it was because of the way she had said, almost casually, "They're not like other families." They drove for hours through the countryside, the city fading behind them like a memory. The trees grew thicker, the air colder, until they turned onto a narrow gravel road that disappeared into the woods. At the end of it stood a house that looked like it had been built to keep secrets. Tall, white, and silent, with windows that reflected the forest instead of what was inside. Clara smiled, squeezing Marcus's hand. "See, not so bad," she said, though her voice had a strange tremor to it. Her parents were waiting on the porch. Dr. Evelyn and Harold Whitmore, the kind of couple who looked born to own land. Evelyn's smile was wide, but her eyes were sharp, assessing Marcus like a specimen. Harold shook his hand firmly, too firmly, his knuckles cold and dry. "We're so glad to finally meet you," he said. "Clara's told us so much." Dinner was a blur of politeness and subtle unease. Evelyn kept asking Marcus about his health, if he exercised, what kind of vitamins he took, how often he slept. Harold, meanwhile, wanted to know about Marcus's family history, as though reading a resume. Clara tried to fill the silence with nervous laughter, but the weight of her parents' questions hung in the air like smoke. After dessert, Evelyn offered Marcus a tour of the property. "You'll love it," she said, her hand lingering on his shoulder a moment too long. "Our family's been here for generations. We take great care of what's ours." They walked through the halls, lined with portraits of people who all looked eerily similar. Pale faces, dark eyes, stiff postures. Marcus noticed something odd. Every painting had a faint shadow behind the subject, almost human-shaped, but twisted as if something inside them wanted to break free. "Beautiful, aren't they?" Evelyn asked softly. "All of them part of the family. In a way, they're still here with us." When Marcus turned back toward her, she was already staring at him with a strange intensity, her smile fading into something unreadable. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. The house creaked in strange rhythms, as if it was breathing. Through the window, he saw lights flickering near the woods, blue, like flashes of electricity. He thought he heard voices too, soft and rhythmic, carried on the wind. When he leaned closer, trying to make out the words, Clara stirred beside him. "Don't," she murmured without opening her eyes. "They don't like to be watched." The next morning, things only grew stranger. The whip, servants and elderly and a young woman who seemed barely conscious, avoided Marcus's gaze completely. When he said good morning, they smiled too widely, as if their faces were struggling to remember how. At breakfast, Evelyn asked him to stay for the weekend. "We're hosting a small gathering tomorrow," she said. "Old friends. They'll be thrilled to meet you." Marcus hesitated. He wanted to leave, but Clara looked at him with pleading eyes. "It'll just be one night," she whispered. He agreed. That afternoon, while Clara napped, Marcus wandered outside. The woods behind the house were dense and silent. He found an old greenhouse, half swallowed by vines, its glass panes cracked and blackened. Inside, rows of plants were growing, but not like any he'd seen before. Their roots pulsed faintly, and their stems seemed to twist toward him as he passed. On the far wall, he found photographs tacked in neat rows. People, dozens of them, smiling awkwardly beside the whip. Some looked familiar. He leaned closer, his pulse quickening. One of them was the groundskeeper, younger, brighter-eyed, standing beside Evelyn. A sharp voice cut through the stillness. "You shouldn't be in here." It was Harold, standing in the doorway, his smile calm but cold. "Some things on this property don't like to be disturbed," he said, taking a step closer. "You understand?" Marcus nodded, backing out slowly. That night, Clara seemed distant. When he asked if something was wrong, she only said, "You'll see tomorrow." And for the first time since arriving, Marcus realized he wasn't sure if she meant it as a promise or a warning. When Saturday arrived, the Whitmore estate seemed to awaken from a centuries-long sleep. From the moment the first car appeared at the edge of the property's long gravel driveway, the air grew thicker, almost electric. Sleek black sedans, old limousines, and polished convertibles rolled in one by one, gleaming under the gray afternoon sky like armored insects. People emerged slowly, all of them dressed in fine fabrics, velvet coats, silk scarves, pearls that glowed faintly even without sunlight. They walked with practiced grace, exchanging polite kisses on the cheek, murmuring words Marcus couldn't quite catch. From the upstairs window, he watched the scene with quiet unease. Something about their movements felt choreographed. Every smile looked rehearsed, every laugh timed to match the others. He tried to convince himself it was just the discomfort of meeting strangers. But deep down, something instinctive told him there was a script being followed, one he hadn't been given. Clara wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, her voice soft but deliberate, as though she were trying to distract him from a distant sound only she could hear. "You'll like them," she said, almost convincing herself. "They can be a bit intense, but they mean well." Marcus chuckled nervously and asked, "Intense how?" She hesitated, her breath catching for a moment. "Just curious." "They're interested in people, really interested." The way she said it made the words hang in the air like a warning disguised as a compliment. When they finally went downstairs, the world seemed to shift subtly. The scent of perfume, the soft hum of strings from an unseen musician, the clinking of crystal glasses. Evelyn moved among her guests with the poise of a priestess conducting a ceremony. She smiled warmly at Marcus and guided him into the center of the room, where faces turned toward him one by one. Each handshake lingered longer than it should. Each gaze seemed to measure something about him: his skin, his posture, the brightness in his eyes. "So this is the young man we've heard so much about," said an older gentleman with silver hair and a cane polished to a mere finish. His voice was slow and deliberate. "Fine structure, good shoulders, healthy complexion." A woman nearby nodded approvingly. "Yes, such energy. You can see it in the eyes, can't you?" Marcus laughed uneasily, muttering a polite thank you, though it felt like he was being appraised rather than complimented. Harold, across the room, watched in silence, a faint smirk curling at the corner of his mouth like someone who'd just closed a deal no one else understood. As the afternoon slipped into evening, the conversations grew stranger. They wanted to know everything about him: where his parents were from, what kind of work he did, if he'd ever been seriously ill, whether he believed in the preservation of vitality. Each question felt carefully chosen, rehearsed. He noticed how often their eyes drifted toward his hands, his neck, his pulse. When he mentioned he was a photographer, a tall woman with severe cheekbones leaned in and said, "Ah, so you capture souls." She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "That's beautiful." He tried to change the subject, but the others didn't seem to notice the discomfort rising behind his polite grin. The room felt hotter, heavier. Somewhere above, a grandfather clock ticked steadily, but its rhythm was wrong. The seconds uneven, like the heartbeat of someone barely alive. Clara stood close, her laughter delicate but forced, and every so often she squeezed his hand too tightly, as though to remind him to stay calm. When Marcus finally excused himself to step outside, the night air struck him with a chill that made him gasp. The sky had turned a bruised purple, and the forest surrounding the estate whispered with an almost human sound. He lit a cigarette, even though he hadn't smoked in years, just to steady his shaking fingers. Then he saw her, at the far end of the yard, half shadowed by the glow of the garden lights. The maid stood perfectly still. She was the same young woman he'd glimpsed earlier, always silent, her eyes downcast. But now she was staring directly at him, her head tilted slightly, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. Her eyes shimmered with unmistakable terror. Marcus took a cautious step toward her, and in that instant, she turned sharply and vanished around the corner of the house. He followed quickly, heart pounding, calling out, but when he reached the side garden, there was nothing there. No sound except the restless wind. Only the faint smell of smoke and roses remained, mingling with something metallic, something like blood. When he went back inside, the house was darker. The chatter had dimmed to murmurs. Evelyn stood at the center of the room, holding a glass of red wine that looked far too thick to be just wine. Her voice carried effortlessly through the hall. "Friends," she said, "thank you for coming. Tonight, we honor the continuation of our legacy, something far older than this house, older even than our names, and we welcome a new chapter." All eyes turned toward Marcus. The silence was suffocating. "Marcus," Evelyn said sweetly, "would you join me for a moment?" He froze, glancing at Clara, whose expression flickered between guilt and fear. "There's something I'd like to show you," She led him through a door at the back of the room, one he hadn't noticed before, into a candlelit hallway lined with mirrors. Their reflections shimmered unnaturally, slightly delayed, as though reality itself were lagging. "Do you believe," Evelyn asked softly, "that life is wasted when it ends?" Marcus frowned. "I guess it depends on how you live it." She smiled. A thoughtful answer. "We believe life can be shared, transferred, preserved." She pressed her hand against a wooden panel. A hidden door slid open, revealing a room filled with medical instruments. Scalpels, syringes, machines that hummed low and constant. Marcus stepped back, breath catching. "What is this?" he whispered. Evelyn turned slowly, her smile sharp as glass. Behind him, he heard footsteps, Clara's heralds, the guests. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Evelyn raised her glass in a silent toast. "You have something we've been searching for a very long time." The candlelight flickered, and in the mirrors, dozens of faces appeared, pale, distorted, trapped within the glass, screaming soundlessly for help. The air inside the hidden room was colder, unnaturally still, as if every breath Marcus took was being recorded by the walls themselves. The instruments gleamed under the flickering candlelight, scalpels neatly aligned, a metal chair bolted to the floor, tubes that pulsed faintly with a reddish glow. The smell was antiseptic at first, then metallic, and finally something darker, like decaying flowers left in a sealed jar. Evelyn moved gracefully around the table, running her fingers across the polished steel as though caressing an old lover. "This place," she said softly, "was built long before the estate existed above it. Knowledge, Marcus, true knowledge, has always lived beneath the surface." He didn't answer. His throat had gone dry. He turned toward Clara, searching her face for some trace of explanation. But her expression was empty, a blend of shame and obedience. When he tried to move, Harold's hand pressed down on his shoulder with terrifying strength. "You should be proud," Harold murmured. "Few are chosen." Marcus's voice cracked. "Chosen for what?" Evelyn looked at him then, and for the first time, he saw what was behind her eyes. Not madness, not cruelty, but a chilling certainty. "For continuation," she whispered. "You see, bodies fail, souls weaken, but consciousness can be renewed, given a stronger vessel. We have perfected what nature never could." She gestured to the mirrors lining the wall. Inside them, faint shapes flickered, faces, eyes, mouths open in silent screams. "Those are the echoes of the ones who came before," she said almost reverently. "Their essence remains, guiding us. Every new host strengthens the lineage." Marcus stumbled backward, his mind refusing to accept the words. "You're insane," he muttered. "You're talking about immortality," Harold finished for her, smiling. "Call it what you want." The machines in the room began to hum softly, their lights pulsing in rhythm with Marcus's racing heartbeat. He lunged toward the door, but two of the guests appeared instantly from the shadows, their faces disturbingly calm. One of them, the tall woman with the severe cheekbones, held a syringe filled with a golden liquid that shimmered as it caught the candlelight. "It's only temporary," she said, her tone soothing, as if talking to a frightened child. "We can't have you damaging yourself before the transfer." Marcus fought, twisting and kicking, but the moment the needle pierced his skin, the world tilted. The floor seemed to dissolve beneath him, and every sound became distant. Warped laughter stretched into echoes. Whispers turned into a chorus of unintelligible voices. He fell forward into darkness. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying on the cold table, restrained by thick leather straps. The ceiling above him was a mosaic of faces painted in gold and red, their eyes replaced by tiny mirrors. He could see himself reflected 100 times over, each reflection blinking slightly out of sync. Evelyn stood beside him, dressed now in a pale surgical gown, her movements precise, ritualistic. "We used to perform this with incantations and bloodletting," she said, adjusting a dial on one of the machines. "But science has given us elegance, efficiency." A faint buzzing filled the room as metal arms extended from the ceiling, each tipped with a delicate instrument. One hovered inches from his temple, glowing with a cold blue light. Marcus tried to scream, but his jaw was locked. Only his eyes could move, darting wildly toward Clara, who stood near the door, trembling. "You said you loved me," he tried to say, but the words came out as a strangled whisper. Clara's tears reflected the blue light like shards of glass. "I do," she said brokenly. "That's why I brought you here, so you could live forever." Evelyn smiled approvingly. "Such devotion," she murmured. "Every generation needs a guardian to choose wisely." As the machine descended, something strange happened. A low, rhythmic vibration began to pulse through the floor, like a heartbeat. The lights flickered. The guests murmured in confusion. Evelyn frowned, adjusting the controls. "No, not now," she hissed. The hum deepened into a growl that seemed to come from beneath the house itself. Marcus could feel it vibrating through his bones, rattling the straps that held him. Somewhere nearby, a mirror cracked, the sound sharp and unnatural. "What's happening?" Clara asked, stepping backward. Harold's expression shifted from confidence to dread. "It's the resonance," he muttered. "The others, they're waking." Evelyn turned sharply, her voice rising. "Contain it. Seal the chamber." But it was too late. The mirrors along the wall began to ripple like water, their surfaces alive with movement. Faces pressed outward, distorted and screaming. The air grew heavy with the scent of burning metal. Marcus's vision blurred, but within the chaos, he saw something impossible. One of the reflected faces was his own, but older, hollow-eyed, whispering words he couldn't hear. The machines sparked violently, and the room plunged into red emergency light. Evelyn shouted, "Orders!" but her voice was swallowed by the sound of glass shattering all around them. Then, from somewhere deep in the mirrors, a voice, many voices layered as one, spoke a single word: "Return." Every candle went out at once. For an instant, absolute silence. Then the sound of the straps snapping, one by one. When Marcus opened his eyes again, the world was washed in red and silver. The humming had stopped, replaced by a low, guttural wind that seemed to breathe from the walls themselves. The restraints hung loose around his wrists. The air smelled of ozone and blood. He sat up slowly, the table slick with condensation, the cold biting into his skin. Around him, the mirrors were shattered, not simply broken, but melted inward, as though something had clawed its way out from inside. The guests were gone. Only Harold remained, sprawled against a wall, his chest rising and falling weakly. His eyes were open, but unfocused, reflecting the crimson light like shards of glass. Marcus staggered to his feet. "What did you do?" he rasped, his throat raw. Harold tried to speak, but only a hoarse rattle escaped his lips. The machines sparked weakly beside them, the smell of burnt insulation filling the chamber. A trail of smoke slithered toward the ceiling like a phantom snake. Marcus turned and froze. Evelyn stood on the far side of the room, her gown torn, her hands trembling. "You broke the connection," she whispered, staring at him with disbelief and terror. "You weren't supposed to fight it. You were supposed to merge." Her words came out uneven, fractured by panic. Behind her, Clara stood motionless, her eyes fixed on Marcus. But something was wrong. Her movements were too still, her posture too rigid. When she finally spoke, her voice was layered. Two tones overlapping, one familiar, one impossibly deep. "You freed them," she said, "but they're still inside you." Marcus stumbled backward, shaking his head. No, that's not possible. Every host leaves a trace," Evelyn hissed. "You've absorbed them all. You're not just Marcus anymore." The walls groaned, the temperature dropping sharply. Frost began to creep across the floor in delicate spirals. Marcus felt a pulse behind his eyes, an alien rhythm that wasn't his own. He could hear whispers, faint, pleading voices overlapping in languages he didn't understand. His reflection in a fragment of glass twisted subtly, his mouth moving half a second behind his thoughts. "Help us," it mouthed, and for a brief, horrible moment, he felt himself answer. Clara took a step closer, her hand twitching as though pulled by invisible strings. "They want out," she murmured. "They'll take whatever form they can. You were meant to contain them, to keep the cycle intact." Her tone softened, and for a second, The real Clara surfaced beneath the layers of possession. "I didn't want this for you," she whispered, "but you're part of it now." Vision blurred again, the outlines of the room bending and contracting, as if reality itself was breathing. He looked down at his arms and saw faint lines glowing beneath his skin. Symbols, old and unfamiliar, pulsing faintly with red light. Evelyn lunged forward, clutching his wrist. "Listen to me," she demanded, voice trembling between rage and fear. "If they fully wake, they'll consume everything. You have to end it before they take control." Her nails dug into his flesh. "You have to end yourself." The suggestion hit him like a hammer. The whispers in his head rose to a scream. He pulled away, stumbling toward the staircase that led upward, the path illuminated by the flickering emergency lights. The air felt thicker with every step, like walking through water. He could hear them, hundreds of voices crying out from within his mind, pressing against his skull, begging for release. When he finally reached the upper floor, dawn was breaking beyond the stained glass windows. The once elegant house was now a ruin of flickering shadows and cracked marble. Every reflection he passed showed a different version of himself, some older, some broken, some smiling with too many teeth. He stumbled into the foyer, where the front doors stood ajar. The wind outside carried a faint hum, the same pitch as the machines below. He turned toward the sound and saw Clara standing at the threshold, her silhouette outlined by pale morning light. "It's not over," she said quietly. "They'll keep calling to you. You're the new vessel." Marcus shook his head violently. "I won't let them." But she only gave him a sad, knowing look. "You already have." Then she stepped backward, fading into the light, her form dissolving like mist. He ran after her and stopped dead when he realized what lay beyond the door. The landscape was wrong. The trees twisted upward in spirals. The sky pulsed faintly as if it were alive, and the horizon looped endlessly. He looked down at his reflection in a puddle near his feet and saw dozens of faces staring back. His own voice whispered from everywhere at once. "The cycle continues." The sound of breaking glass echoed from behind him as the last of the mirrors in the house gave way. The wind grew stronger, swirling with voices, fragments of memory, screams, prayers, laughter. Marcus took one last breath, and the world around him folded inward like paper catching fire. The last thing he felt was warmth, not pain, not fear, but something disturbingly familiar. John Kramer had always believed that life had a cruel balance, a justice that the world often failed to deliver. Now, weakened by disease, he moved with careful calculation, each step measured as though the weight of inevitability pressed against his chest. His journey to Mexico was supposed to be a private affair, a treatment that promised a temporary reprieve from the relentless deterioration of his body. Yet, from the moment he crossed the border, an unease settled deep within him. The streets of the small Mexican town were alive with vibrancy, children weaving between vendors, and the air thick with the scent of sizzling meat and dust from the unpaved roads. Kramer's eyes, sharp despite the pallor of illness, caught the subtle inconsistencies, the smiles that seemed rehearsed, the glances that lingered longer than politeness should allow. Something in the rhythm of the town's heartbeat felt off, but he dismissed it initially, attributing it to fatigue, to the shadow of the disease that had already begun to dull his senses. Even so, the faint echo of suspicion, honed over years of orchestrating traps and tests for those who escaped moral consequence, refused to leave him. He checked into a small, discreet clinic, the sort that promised discretion, care, and access to experimental procedures. The receptionist's gaze lingered too long, the handshake slightly too firm, as if weighing him against an unseen scale. Kramer's hands shook imperceptibly as he signed the forms, not from weakness, but from an anticipation that pulsed with a bitter familiarity. Danger often hides behind courtesy. The treatment room smelled faintly of antiseptic and chemicals, sterile and cold. Yet beneath the surface of cleanliness, there was something pungent, the tang of human ambition and greed. The doctor, a thin man with hawk-like features and a meticulously groomed mustache, spoke with an almost hypnotic calm, outlining a procedure that promised renewal, an elixir against the advancing disease. Kramer listened intently, nodding at the appropriate moments. But every detail was stored not in trust but in suspicion. As the procedure began, lights too bright cut into his already sensitive eyes, and the machinery hummed with an unnerving persistence. He felt the prick of the needle, the cold bite of the serum, and a wave of dizziness overtook him. Yet his mind remained sharp, calculating. In the midst of the sterile hum, Kramer noticed irregularities, the slight hesitation in the nurse's movements, the almost imperceptible glance exchanged with the doctor. Every instinct screamed betrayal. Minutes stretched into eternity. When the procedure concluded, and he was helped from the table, the doctor's smile was too wide, the words of reassurance too rehearsed. Kramer's suspicions solidified. He had been deceived. The treatment was not to heal, but to exploit. A cruel manipulation designed to take advantage of the desperate and sick. The realization ignited a cold fury within him, a dark clarity sharpening his senses, each beat of his weakened heart carrying the echo of a plan long cultivated, a vengeance meticulously prepared over years of moral calculus. Kramer's body was frail, yet his mind was a fortress of meticulous strategy. He spent the night in his modest hotel room, reviewing every movement of the doctor, every gesture of the nurses, every nuance that had hinted at deceit. The streets outside were alive with nocturnal energy, the distant cries of vendors packing up for the day, the rustle of animals seeking food, and the quiet hiss of water through narrow pipes. Every sound was amplified in Kramer's mind. Catalogued, assessed, he traced the layout of the clinic, memorized the security camera's angles, noted the locations of exits, and imagined the movements of those who would soon find themselves trapped in a scenario they had set for him. He knew that brute force was unnecessary. Precision and patience would suffice. By dawn, he was ready. The clinic had underestimated him, mistaking weakness for compliance, frailty for submission. The traps he would set would not merely punish, they would reveal character, test instinct, and illuminate truth in the harshest way possible. Kramer had always believed that the human mind bends under pressure in ways the body cannot, and now, the ultimate test would unfold in a place where deception had once reigned unchecked. As the sun rose over the terracotta rooftops of the town, Kramer stepped into the narrow streets, his silhouette tall and unwavering despite the pallor of illness. Shadows lengthened in the corners of alleyways, dancing alongside him as if acknowledging the inevitability of what was to come. He moved methodically, almost imperceptibly, observing the world around him, the hurried pace of passers-by, the vehicles rattling over uneven roads. The faint smell of fear mingled with everyday life. Every detail was important, every behavior noted, catalogued, and assigned a probability of reaction. By mid-morning, Kramer returned to the clinic, no longer as a patient, but as a silent predator. He knew the staff would continue with their rehearsed routines, oblivious to the storm gathering, in the form of a man they had dismissed, as frail and compliant. In the shadows of sterile hallways and behind locked doors, a meticulous plan began to unfold, one that would make them confront their choices, their moral failings, and the consequences of exploiting the vulnerable. Kramer's hands trembled slightly as he set the first piece into place, but the tremor was not fear. It was anticipation. He had been given a second chance at life, and he intended to wield it not for survival alone, but for justice. The clinic had become the stage, the staff actors unaware that they were the subjects, and Kramer, their unrelenting observer, director, and final arbiter. The clinic was quiet, almost unnervingly so, except for the faint hum of air conditioning and the occasional drip from a leaky pipe in the hallway. Kramer moved like a shadow, every step calculated, his frail body concealing the storm of precision and fury that coiled beneath his skin. He had observed them for days, learned their habits, catalogued weaknesses, and now every motion he made was designed to manipulate, to guide the unsuspecting staff into a dance of their own demise. The main treatment room, which had seemed sterile and welcoming, was now a cage in his mind, a stage for reckoning. He replaced the syringes with harmless duplicates, repositioned cameras to catch reactions rather than record procedures, and adjusted the lighting so that the room itself would amplify every glance, every tremor, every flicker of panic. Outside, the town went about its morning with casual oblivion, vendors calling, children laughing as they chased stray dogs, cars rattling over cobblestones. Yet the clinic was an island of tension, insulated from normality. Kramer's mind raced with possibilities. A slip of a wrist, a diverted gaze, a hesitation at the wrong moment could mean the difference between revelation and survival. He paused in front of a door, listening, feeling the vibration of footsteps through the floorboards. A nurse passed by, humming softly, oblivious to the fact that the melody she carried would become her last distraction from terror. He memorized her pace, the angle at which she approached the treatment table, the tilt of her head as she inspected instruments. Every detail would be a factor, a thread in the web he was about to weave. Kramer's illness whispered weakness, but his mind screamed clarity. Every trap was designed to test, not merely to punish, to reveal character in the harshest light. The first door he locked behind him with a quiet click, a sound almost imperceptible. Yet it signaled the beginning. In the central corridor, Harold moved with overconfidence, unaware of the subtle adjustments Kramer had made. The hallway lights flickered as Kramer's fingers danced over a control panel, masking his presence, masking the subtle shift of surveillance angles to ensure that no escape could be clean or unobserved. He heard the faint shuffle of shoes, the quickened heartbeat of someone who sensed unease without knowing why. Kramer's chest ached from his disease, a reminder that every second counted. Yet it also reminded him that he had nothing to lose, only debts to settle, only justice to deliver. He pressed a hand against a wall, feeling the vibrations of the building as it reacted to movement, a faint thrum that resonated with the suppressed fear of those within. A doctor appeared at the far end of the corridor, reviewing charts, his back to Kramer, every motion predictable. Kramer's lips curled into a small, grim smile. He pressed a switch under the floor, and a subtle trapdoor released, sending the unsuspecting man into a dark, enclosed space below. No harm yet, only fear, disorientation, the first step of revelation. The sound of stumbling feet and muffled shouts echoed faintly, confirming the success of the first stage. Kramer inhaled deeply, feeling the chemical temps of disinfectant and human sweat, the pulse of adrenaline in his own veins, replacing the rhythm of his faltering heart. Clara appeared in the hallway next, carrying a tray of medical supplies, her movements hesitant, nervous. Kramer adjusted the lighting to cast exaggerated shadows across the walls. Her figure stretched and distorted. She froze as she stepped into the corridor, the faint creak of floorboards sounding deafening in her ears. Kramer's voice, calm and deliberate, drifted from nowhere, as if the room itself had found speech. "Every choice has a consequence," he said. Her eyes widened, panic blooming. She dropped the tray, its contents scattering like shards of order across the tile floor. As she bent to pick them up, the floor shifted subtly, a narrow pit beneath her feet opened, sending her sliding into a padded chamber below. She screamed, not in pain, but in terror. As Kramer observed the reactions from above, his body trembled slightly, a combination of weakness and the thrill of control. He reminded himself that this was not malice, but revelation, a forced confrontation with greed and deceit. In the faint light of the chamber, he could see their faces, wide-eyed, trembling, finally exposed to the fragility of their choices. Every reflection in the mirrors lining the corridor amplified their fear, echoing it, reinforcing the inevitability of judgment. By mid-afternoon, the clinic had become a labyrinth of traps, corridors, and hidden cameras, each designed to push the staff to the brink of panic while exposing their true natures. Harold, trapped in a narrow enclosure, pounded against the walls, his voice distorted by the acoustics, begging for mercy. Clara, shaking violently, tried to rationalize every shadow and flicker as coincidence. Yet she could feel her own pulse betraying her. Kramer watched from above, frail yet unrelenting, knowing that the sickness that clawed at his body could never diminish the clarity of his purpose. Outside, the streets were unchanged, unaware, innocent of the horror unfolding in the shadows. Every step, every choice, every reaction inside the clinic had been anticipated, catalogued, and exploited. He paused briefly in the central corridor, feeling the pulse of his own disease, the strain in his joints, the ache of mortality. Yet for the first time in years, he felt alive, sharp, and in control. The traps were set, the stage was complete, and the truth, cruel, unrelenting, undeniable, was ready to be revealed to those who thought they had manipulated him, only to discover they were the ones being dissected. By late afternoon, the clinic had transformed completely, from a place of sterile professionalism into a theater of terror. Kramer moved through the hallways with deliberate slowness, each step measured, every motion a calculated maneuver in a game he had mastered long ago. The flickering lights above cast jagged shadows, elongating the silhouettes of the trapped staff into grotesque parodies of themselves. He paused at the top of a staircase, watching Harold's frantic attempts to escape the enclosure below, the way his muscles strained against the padded walls. Each scream, each shudder, each pleading glance reflected back at Kramer through the distorted mirrors lining the corridor, amplifying the revelation that every deceit, every manipulation, every careless act had consequences. Kramer's body ached from the disease gnawing at him. Yet in this agony, he found clarity, the kind that only comes from standing on the precipice of mortality and witnessing the fragility of human morality laid bare. The machines, once harmless instruments of healing, now hummed with an unnatural resonance, a percussive thrum that seemed to sync with the rhythm of panic, echoing through the enclosed spaces. Every sound, every vibration of the floor beneath his feet was catalogued in his mind, feeding into the next stage of reckoning he had meticulously planned. Outside, the town remained oblivious, the ordinary life of the streets continuing without interruption, as if nothing sinister could exist just beyond the veil of normality. Yet inside, Kramer orchestrated each detail with painstaking precision. A tray tipped over here, a floorboard giving way there, a shadow falling in just the right angle, all designed not to harm physically, but to strip away pretense, to expose the raw, vulnerable essence of those who had dared to manipulate the desperate. Evelyn, another member of the clinic's staff, moved cautiously down a corridor Kramer had prepared, unaware of the subtle shift in the air, the faint mechanical whisper of the trapdoor beneath her steps. She paused, sensing the unnatural stillness, the absence of the usual hum of ventilation that should have filled the hallway. Kramer's voice, calm, yet imbued with cold authority, emanated from hidden speakers. "You've played with life carelessly. Now you will see the truth of your actions." Evelyn's pulse quickened, fear coiling like a living thing around her chest, constricting breath and thought. She stepped forward, and the floor responded, panels shifting, revealing narrow chutes, padded but disorienting, dropping her into a chamber where shadows danced against the walls as if alive. Reacting to her terror, Kramer observed from a nearby vantage point, the faint tremor in his hands, not of weakness, but anticipation. He was not merely punishing, he was enlightening. Every detail he had engineered was designed to force them to confront their choices, their failures, and the consequences of greed and deceit. The whine of electricity and faint creaking of the building heightened the terror, turning every ordinary sound into a harbinger of dread. Kramer's mind catalogued each reaction, each shiver, each involuntary gasp, data to be used, memories that would haunt them long after the ordeal ended. Meanwhile, Harold's panic had escalated, his shouts ricocheting from the walls, creating an auditory maze that disoriented even him. Kramer adjusted the lighting in the room, shadows stretching unnaturally, mirrors reflecting fragments of himself into Harold's line of sight, creating illusions of multiple Kramer, each more menacing than the last. The sickening smell of antiseptic mixed with sweat, fear, and the faint tang of blood as a result of minor scrapes from the padded walls. Kramer watched carefully, ensuring each element was perfectly balanced to maximize psychological pressure while avoiding permanent physical harm, the hallmark of his meticulous cruelty. His disease-bound body reminded him of mortality, But it also reminded him of purpose. Time was finite, but justice, carefully administered, could echo forever. He observed Clara, now pale and trembling, attempting to rationalize the horrors around her. Her mind raced, trying to deny reality, to construct explanations that would absolve her of culpability. But Kramer's traps were subtle, each one designed to expose lies and force the unprepared to confront truth. Every door, every shadow, every mirror, every mechanical hum had a purpose, a calculated effect, a moral test. This was more than vengeance. It was education through terror, revelation through fear. Kramer's breathing was shallow, yet each inhale fed his focus, sharpening his resolve even as his body weakened. The staff were learning, unwillingly, lessons about hubris, greed, and moral decay, all within the confines of walls they had once thought innocuous. As evening fell, the clinic's once orderly halls had transformed into a labyrinth of psychological trials, each staff member isolated within chambers that manipulated sound, light, and perception. Kramer moved silently between them, a phantom presence, watching faces contort with fear, hearing whispers of regret, and observing reactions that spoke volumes of character. The machines, lights, and shadows combined to create a symphony of terror, each element interacting with human instinct to produce raw, unfiltered reactions. He paused to watch Harold, exhausted and shaking, realize the futility of struggle, the inevitability of revelation. Evelyn, trembling, began to mutter truths she had hidden even from herself. Confessions to moral compromises, admissions of deceit, all forced from her by the environment Kramer had crafted. Each revelation strengthened Kramer's resolve. Each acknowledgement of guilt was a testament to the precision of his plan. Outside, dusk settled over the town, indifferent to the horrors that had unfolded behind the clinic walls. Kramer felt the chill of his illness, the weight of mortality pressing down, yet the clarity and focus in his mind were unparalleled. This was the reckoning, the moment when deception, greed, and indifference were confronted, examined, and forced to face consequences. He moved silently through the shadows, preparing for the final stage, the culmination of hours of preparation, patience, and meticulous calculation. The night had arrived, and with it, the moment of truth for those who had underestimated him. Night fell over the clinic, casting long shadows that seemed to slither along the walls as Kramer moved silently through the corridors. The once bright hallways were now consumed by darkness, interrupted only by the faint, flickering light of malfunctioning bulbs and the dim glow from hidden surveillance equipment. Each trapped staff member had reached the brink of despair, and Kramer, frail yet unyielding, observed their faces with a precise calculation, honed over decades of orchestrating the inevitable. Harold's eyes darted from shadow to shadow, realizing that every instinct, every decision had been anticipated, manipulated, and exploited. Evelyn and Clara, isolated in separate chambers, muttered confessions into the oppressive silence, voices trembling yet unable to conceal the truths they had long buried. Beneath layers of denial, Kramer's body ached with the relentless assault of illness, but the clarity of his mind burned brighter than ever. This was the culmination, the moment where the consequences of greed, deception, and moral compromise would manifest in ways that could no longer be ignored. He moved deliberately, pressing buttons, shifting lighting, activating mechanisms that were subtle yet devastating in their psychological effect. Every creak of floorboard, every shadow cast by a flickering light, every distorted reflection in mirrors mounted along the walls became a testament to his meticulous orchestration of justice. The staff were not merely victims of circumstance. They were participants in their own reckoning, forced to confront their fears, their failures, and their own complicity in a system that had allowed them to exploit the desperate. Kramer's breathing was shallow, each inhale a reminder of mortality. Yet it also reinforced the precision of purpose. He was not punishing blindly. He was revealing truth through the lens of terror. In one chamber, Harold faced a mechanical contraption that seemed innocuous at first. Yet every motion triggered subtle consequences, shifting floors, swinging panels, and distorted auditory feedback that disoriented and amplified panic. Kramer observed remotely, noting every twitch of muscle, every flare of fear, every word uttered under the strain of his traps. Outside, the town remained oblivious, the mundane rhythm of life continuing as though the clinic did not exist. But inside, time had stretched, warped, and intensified. Evelyn, pinned by shadows and manipulated by controlled lighting, reached the edge of psychological collapse. Kramer's voice, calm and measured, echoed from hidden speakers. The truth lies within your fear. Only by facing it will you understand the choices you made. Her eyes widened as realization dawned. Not only had she been deceived, but she had also deceived herself. The layers of pretense peeled away under the oppressive, orchestrated pressure Kramer had created. The room's environment reacted dynamically, lights shifting, walls subtly contracting, sounds amplified, creating the illusion of omnipresent forces pressing in, demanding acknowledgement of guilt and accountability. Kramer felt the familiar ache of disease claw at his chest, yet it was eclipsed by the exhilaration of control and clarity. Every reaction was catalogued, assessed, and utilized. His illness did not diminish his capacity to execute a final, unrelenting judgment. Clara, in another part of the clinic, faced a similar psychological crucible. Mirrors distorted her perception, shadows contorted into grotesque shapes, and mechanical contrivances shifted beneath her feet, creating a sense of instability and inescapable observation. Kramer's interventions were subtle, precise, and merciless in their psychological impact, forcing her to confront the consequences of her own choices. Each scream, each tremor of fear, each whispered confession became part of a symphony of revelation, orchestrated by Kramer. His body weakened by illness, he moved like a wraith through corridors and staircases, a presence more cerebral than physical, manipulating, observing, and guiding the final outcomes. The night pressed on, the terror amplified by the darkness, shadows, and meticulously controlled environment. Every sound, every shift of light, every mechanical movement was part of a carefully constructed narrative of reckoning. Kramer's mind, despite the assault of disease, was sharper than ever, every detail anticipated, every outcome prefigured. The staff were fully immersed in the judgment he had devised, a crucible of fear, moral exposure, and revelation. As the clock approached midnight, Kramer initiated the final sequence, a crescendo of terror, illumination, and revelation. Doors aligned, lights synchronized, traps converged, everything orchestrated to bring each staff member to the edge of comprehension. Harold, Evelyn, and Clara faced their own psychological mirrors, truths they could no longer deny, and the full weight of consequence settled upon them. Kramer, frail yet triumphant in mind and spirit, observed the culmination, knowing the lesson had been delivered. Outside, the streets remained ignorant, silent witnesses to nothing. Inside, the clinic had become an arena of moral reckoning, a place where deception, greed, and moral compromise were confronted with unrelenting precision. Kramer's body sagged under the weight of fatigue and disease, yet he felt a profound clarity, a sense of fulfillment. He had survived deceit, navigated treachery, and exacted judgment not through brutality alone, but through the unassailable force of carefully measured terror and revelation. As the first hints of dawn began to creep through the windows, he retreated into shadow, leaving behind a clinic forever marked by the confrontation with truth, and those who had underestimated him forever changed. The judgment was complete, the reckoning irreversible, and the lesson unforgettable.